All right, let's talk about politics and crazy stuff and late stage capitalism and all of my opinions on this because I'm in that mood. This video is basically just going to be a political dump, and I'm not taking any particular side. I'm just predicting the future and how I think things might just go. Because here are some interesting trends, right? So, first of all, what is late stage capitalism, right? I'm sure many of you are familiar with it at this point, but the idea is that basically capitalism reaches a point, right? The natural progression of capitalism is that businesses get more and more efficient. So a few businesses take a large share of the revenue, and they start to consolidate power and grow and have more employees and drive the smaller businesses out of competition until eventually, you know, everything becomes hyper efficient from the top down. And you say, what about niches? And what about a small business doing this or that? Yeah, sure, that all exists, like in these models or whatever. But the basic idea of late stage capitalism is you have rampant income inequality. You have a high cost of living for everyday people, because the economy is no longer built for the middle class. The middle class starts to evaporate because basically there are so many hyper efficient ways for the rich people to get rich, right? You have something called compound interest, where the more money you have, the more money you can make as long as you hold on to that money. And it's kind of a snowball effect, right? You get higher return on your investments, like your stocks or your savings account, right? Your interest pays higher. If you have 100 grand in a savings account, that's going to make $4,000 or $5,000 a year. It's like a high yield savings account, as opposed to 400 or 500 if you have $10,000 in there. So, right, like which is going to make you more money? So eventually you have, you know, families hoarding wealth. They have a lot of money. They have a lot of power. They start to influence the politics. Things start to get a little dystopian. Sounds familiar, right? So this is late stage capitalism, is where you get to a point where instead of having a healthy middle class where a lot of people make, decent amounts of money and they're able to, afford a house and a family and having kids, all of a sudden, it's harder to buy a house. It is harder to get a job. It's hard that pays any sort of living wage. It's harder to therefore have a family or have kids. You can't afford these expenses. People have to delay it later in life. So instead of doing this stuff in their 20s, they're doing it in their 30s. And all of this stuff, you don't need me to tell you what's going on out there, right? We know this. And some interesting things start to happen. And honestly, I think, the thing is that technology is speeding up a lot of these trends. You have a very globalized society where now, like, you wonder why housing prices go up, for example, or why it's more competitive to land a job that you want or get into a university, because you have a lot of people, right? If you have, let's say, the United States of America, where I live, has a lot of very valuable property and jobs and all this stuff. It's not just appealing to Americans, it's appealing to immigrants from overseas, and they come in, and they do high skilled labor, and they come and get these things, and rich people come here and they just they do their thing and they buy everything up. And so it's like you reach a point where it's like, wow, it's a really competitive economy, and it sucks. Ever since I was a kid, I've always hated competition. I like, I can get competitive, but in the sense that I always hated when everything needed to be a competition. I'm like, it's fun, we can compete or whatever. Like, we can run races at recess or whatever. This is fun. But like, guys, why don't we play a game where we're like building stuff together? That was always me. I liked competitive games, but I liked creative games more. And so obviously I don't really vibe with, I don't think that many people really vibe with late stage capitalism, because it's kind of a nasty little thing where you can be basically a skilled person in many respects and still not be doing well in life if you are struggling to, right? You have high student loans, struggling to get a job because there's so many applications these days. You're struggling to do everything. You kept struggling to pay off your car because it was so expensive. It's like you're playing Monopoly, and but you're joining in on round 10, or I've never played Monopoly, but you're joining in on round 10 when people have already bought up all the buildings, and you're like, what the heck? Like, how am I supposed to start off in this? We know this. Now let's get into the fun part of the video. Where is this going to go? I can see it in a couple different directions, right? Because here's the thing. Over the past 5 to 10 years, late stage capitalism has just gotten more extreme. Income inequality has just grown. Inflation has gone rampant. All this stuff. We know this. Where's it going to go? You say, oh, it's just going to keep going like that forever. Well, I don't think so exactly, because take a look at history. When people find themselves in times of vast inequality, eventually the system breaks. Look at the French Revolution. Look at any of them, the Russian Revolution, the Chinese Revolution, you know? Eventually, when you get to a point where all the wealth accumulates at the top, people are like, wait a minute, this is a scam. We're not going to work for pennies. We're going to actually rise up in revolt. Now, I'll give you scenario one is that late stage capitalism continues. Here's one difference between now and those past times, right? To be honest, standard of living, although it really reaching those milestones is very difficult, like having a family and buying a house in a nice neighborhood and all this stuff is very difficult. But just living life is not, I'm going to be careful with my words here. I'm not going to say that just surviving is easy, but I'm going to say that for a lot of people, right? There are ways that you can get by. I mean, they have, even if you can't get a job, right? They have government assistance programs. You can find a gig. You can do all sorts of stuff. Like basic survival, especially compared to a third world country, is pretty doable. I mean, look at the actual yes, like labor force participation, which is a good metric, better than unemployment rate, is down. Like less people are working. This is true. But more people are exiting the labor force rather. But, like people are not starving, right? People are still surviving, in the United States. And that's the country I'm going to talk about here, but the developed world in general. But, and the other thing too, is that like people can be placated these days, like really, if you wanted to, you could spend your whole life just, entertainment is at its peak. You can watch endless movies, endless Netflix. You can just call people, talk to people, hop on a Discord, hop on some video games, spend your entire life making pennies, occasionally ordering DoorDash, eating junk food, watching Netflix, and kind of just living that life. That I would say that is actually not that hard to do most of the time. Most of the time there are ways that you can get to that point of living. I mean, you might even, some people do go homeless, but even then, right? Let's say, you own a car. Some people actually do live in their car. It's like, it's not that far fetched. Like you move in, like a bunch of people live in a house together. There are strategies you can use in a rough economy to get by, to survive. And the thing is, it's easy. Back in the day, they used to say, distract the masses with bread and circus. But these days yeah, exactly. It's like if they don't have bread and circus, that's when they revolt. So if they don't have food, they don't have entertainment. Food and entertainment are super cheap. Let's be honest. Good, healthy food is not super cheap, but, and even some fast food is going up in price, but you can find cheap food. You can live on Doritos if you want. Food is cheap. Entertainment is cheap, relatively speaking. People might never want to change the system. The inertia of the system is very strong, and it might just continue for the rest of our lives. That's scenario one. Late stage capitalism continues. It's a little bleak, it's a little gray, but hey, you can find comfort. Let's get into the fun ones. I'm a big believer in something called horseshoe theory. If you ever seen any political videos, you might have heard of it. The whole idea basically is that instead of, you have like a political axis, you have left wing, right wing, authoritarian, libertarian. That's the popular one, right? Instead of that being like, a grid, it's kind of more of a horseshoe, because what happens is, people like left-wing and right-wing extremists tend to actually agree on a lot of things, right? For example, Nazi Germany and so the Soviet Union hated each other. Absolutely. But can we say that their governments were that different? I mean, they both used absolute control of the state. And they were extremely nationalistic, and they cared about, or they at least pretended to care about the workers, and they were all about national pride and the family unit and all this stuff. They were basically the same. The only difference is that, Germany was all about its fascism, and white Aryans are the supreme or whatever, and the USSR was all about its communism, and so they hated each other because they had different messages, but they had the same methods to enact those messages, which is a totalitarian state. There really wasn't that much difference. And so my thought process here is that the far right and the far left actually have a lot in common. They both want to destroy democracy, and therefore they actually sometimes will team up to do that, in the sense that they will do that. Like, they will sometimes weirdly work together to try to defeat the middle, because they have more in common than the centrists who just want to maintain capitalism. So, right, and we're seeing some exciting stuff. You want to see history get made. We're seeing some fun stuff right now, because if you look at the voting, if you look at the political positions of young men and young women, I don't know if you guys have seen, the gender gap is crazy in terms of like men have moved very far to the right, women have moved very far to the left, whatever. But in general, Gen Z, they can both agree on one thing. They're more extreme than the older generations, than Gen X and the baby boomers. They are more extreme. Gen Z likes extremism. You have politicians who are democratic socialists on the left, and on the right, they are, they're that other word. They are fascists in a sense. I'm not going to go out and claim that, they're Nazi Germany or whatever. And I'm not even going to necessarily say that, I'm not telling you that, I'm not telling you I'm a leftist. You think I'm going to tell you my political opinions? I'm not telling you whether I'm left wing or right wing. I'm just going to say objectively, fascism is extreme right wing and socialism is extreme left wing, in my opinion. I don't know, there are other interpretations, but that's a common one. And the right is kind of moving towards fascism, and the left is kind of moving towards communism. And both of those in their extreme form, like I said before, are basically the same thing. They're different shades of the same thing. You have a totalitarian government, and whether that government values, whether that government wants to scapegoat a certain population, and values and deport, and get rid of them, and value like a pure state in that sense. I'm not saying that, the right wing is against other races. That's not what I'm saying. In fact, they're actually, in 2024, Donald Trump got the most diverse voting coalition of any Republican. It was pretty crazy. He got 3 times as many black people, a much higher amount of Hispanic people on his side. So I'm not saying that, the right wing is becoming like racist, like Nazi Germany. What I'm saying is that they're becoming like a fascist kind of idea, in the sense that objectively, what do they want? They want a stronger government that interferes with stuff. You see some of the stuff that's going on in the news today, and you're like, this is not. Although I actually don't watch that much news, because I suggest avoiding. It's the news is very biased these days. But anyway, my point is that a lot of the stuff that the government is doing is totally new, and does not fit into that small government idea at all of that the Republicans used to have. So, right wing is becoming fascist, left wing is becoming socialist. This is fun, because you know why? These future elections, as the older generations die out, and as cost of living and these situations don't get better, because the government's not doing any meaningful things to change that, because it's bought out by corporations, right? They're not doing anything about the housing crisis, or about cost of living, or about any of these stuff that are naturally going to get worse because of the consolidation of capital, because of the natural forces of capital. Karl Marx's Communist Manifesto, pick up a copy sometime, because it actually is kind of uncanny how much it predicts, but that's the thing. I think that the right and the left are actually going to, in a way, work together. Maybe not openly, but as forces to knock out the middle. I think we're not going to see a return to depolarization. I think we're going to see right-wing extreme party and left-wing extreme party, and the moderates are going to get kicked out. The Hillary Clintons and the Joe Bidens are out of here, and you're going to have some new people. You're going to have some new ideologies, some new faces showing up. Issues of technology are actually going to become politically relevant, because AI and automation is going crazy, and it's crazy that the politicians still don't talk about it. I think that's one of the most important issues of our time. about how to handle it, but whatever. You know, like, what do I know? I'm just some Gen Z kid. These politicians are like 80 years old. They don't know what AI is, but or they no, they do. You know, like they do. You know, I mean, Trump is talking about it. Like they're talking about it, but not quite in the ways that I would want. But that's what I'm saying. Anyway, prediction number 2 for the future. God, that was long-winded. So number 1 is late stage capitalism continues. Number 2 is that we get some sort of revolution, but it could be either from the right wing or the left wing. It doesn't really matter. They're going to fight for power, but they're both going to work together, right? Let's say next administration is a far left administration, which actually, like, that would be kind of fun. I hope, you know, kind of change it up. It's a far left, like, socialist administration. They want to give everybody health care and everybody, like, lift everyone out of poverty, maybe even a universal basic income. You never know. Yeah, that's what we might just get next time. I kind of hope it happens, because that'd be not out of any political, you don't know how I'm going to vote, but I'm just saying that it would be fun, because then, right, then they're going to erode some institutions of democracy, and then the right wing is going to come back and they're going to erode some institutions of democracy, and one of these days, one of them is going to grab enough control to just dismantle the whole government. You're like, Jaden, that's crazy. I'm not saying that's what's most likely to happen. I give late stage capitalism winning like at least an 80% chance, but this is a solid 10% chance that this happens, that the American government as we know it falls apart, because I'm saying times are getting more politically extreme because we're reaching the end of capitalism. We're reaching late stage capitalism. All the signs are there. Read the Communist Manifesto, predicts all this stuff, you know, do some research, whatever. It's all thanks to technology, you know, thank you technology for messing everything up. And we're about to head towards a new era of politics entirely. So yeah, that's what I'm saying. And once that happens, who knows what's going to happen, because you've never in the history of the world have had the United States with a totalitarian kind of government. It's never happened. We would basically be like China 2.0 in the sense that, like, the United States of America is the most powerful country in the world. And if we were not democratic, that would actually be crazy. So I'm not, you know, making this video to try to scare you guys. If you're anything like me and you have kind of like a weird, twisted fascination with this stuff, if anything, I'm actually trying to excite you guys that some real history might be going down. I give that one a 10% chance. And what's the other 10% chance? Well, this is what actually the middle path that I would advocate for personally. Again, I'm going to be really vague here because you don't know who I'm voting for, how I'm voting. You don't know if I'm right or I'm left, center, libertarian, whatever. You don't know what I am, but I think we can all agree on this. I think we can all agree that working class people should in some sense be prioritized. I think we all agree that big business and big government is kind of a threat and shouldn't be given too much power. And I think we can all agree that the best path forward would actually be to go a little backwards, in my opinion. I think that we need a socially conservative movement. I think that people should be a little more traditional. People should, should value the family and the community again. And, you know, maybe like, I don't know, we might even see a little bit of a return of religion. Religion has its ups and downs, but certainly I don't think the death of religion or whatever, like, it's not death. I don't see it dying out. The rates of people going to church or synagogue or temple or whatever, mosque, not as much mosque. Muslims they follow through, but the rate of people in these secular countries going to church and synagogue is going down. But it's I believe the data is plateauing. I haven't seen the data lately, but I would believe that it would plateau because the people who are already in that community who like it, you know, it's instead of everyone being there, it's the people who are personally drawn to it. And that's not such a terrible thing. But, you know, it consolidates. But I think that might start to see an uptick again as people get sick of a society whose only values are basically hedonism, in a sense. Or rather, it's devoid of values, you know? Capitalism doesn't give a society values. You need national identity. You need religion to give a society values. And so, hold on, sorry, there's just a car behind me, but I don't think it's a problem. Anyway, so we might see a return of religion, community, the family. If people stopped being on the internet all the time and stopped using AI all the time, they might develop less weird ideologies and identities and facts and false facts and biased views of the world. And I think that would be better for everyone. And people might just become a little more normal again. I'm not saying the past wasn't perfect. The past was unequal and racist and people were petty and all this stuff, but we have a second chance to do it right this time. Focus on organic communities, going out in your city, not going out in your town, rather than just spending all your time on Discord and gaming and social media. That's kind of a better thing to do overall. I think we can agree on that. So if society, then that's really more of a moral change and a spiritual change than a political change. So a socially conservative movement would calm everybody down. Like if that became cool to actually like have these old school values of like the family and the community, that would calm everyone down. People would actually talk to their neighbors again. They would stop hating their neighbors if they voted for, like, people say, like, if you voted for Trump, like, or if you voted for Biden, like, both sides are saying that the other person's side is, like, completely evil, stupid, ridiculous, doesn't deserve to be American, all these ugly things. If people stop saying that crap and actually learn to resolve some of their differences and stop watching fake news that is, and biased media that is twisting their perception of the world either towards the left or the right, then maybe society would start to heal from all this stuff. And what would happen, that would be kind of a trickle up to the top, because people will stop voting for extremists and people will calm down and actually be all right. And I'm not saying that that would fix the cost of living problem, right? It wouldn't fix the economics. The economics is the real, danger here. It wouldn't necessarily fix the late stage capitalism, the economics. However, people could at least work together to solve these problems. Maybe it becomes more socially acceptable for people to live in community homes or to live with their family. I mean, it's already becoming more socially acceptable for people to live with their family, for people to help out their neighbors, for people to be charitable, for people to be kind, and to let go of shaming other people. And for, it takes in terms of people having families, having houses and stuff, it takes a village to raise a kid. If you got neighbors who you actually trust, if you have people in your lives and you're not just spending all your time focused on work, because another thing too, I think a lot of people overwork themselves. Yes, to survive, but no, because people take it past that and they want status and they want money to flex. And that's why they work harder than they need to. And that's why they delay these milestones. So if people saw family values again, they might actually, it's not going to be perfect, but they might actually go back to the way that people used to live. And then they'll be less extreme. And then we'll avoid the revolution, which would be, it would be boring, but not in the soul-sucking way of the late-stage capitalism outcome. It would be content. It would be happy. People would be a lot happier. So these are my three visions of the future. You got number one is late-stage capitalism, and I think that's where we're headed, sadly. But hey, at least we'll all survive. You have number two is a totalitarian regime from either the right or the left. It doesn't matter, because it's going to be a lot of fireworks. It's going to be a lot of fun to watch until maybe, some of us don't make it through that alive. You might want to set aside. So you might want to have a little savings. You might want to have a little protection just in case. But number three, the optimistic future, a socially conservative movement. I'm not talking Republican. I'm talking socially conservative. That's what we need. And that's the 10%. And I don't know, maybe I'll write about it, honestly, because it's kind of an idea I've had for a long time. But I think that is the way that we fix this mess. If we return to traditional values, that will trickle up, and the politics will get less crazy, and people will get less crazy, and people will get along again. But yeah, those are my visions of the future. Let's check back. I don't know, bookmark this video, check back in like 2050, 2040, when we're all like 40, 50 years old or whatever. Hey, it might not even take that long. I don't know, because technology does this. But check back and see if I'm right, It's going to be late stage capitalism probably, but I hope it's the socially conservative ending. And that's either of those would probably be better than us than the totalitarian regime. So that's the good news. It probably won't be that, but don't hold your breath. All right. Yeah. If you guys, please, if you have any thoughts, comment, because I love talking about this type of stuff. So comment and I will talk to you. All right. See ya.